Hi, so today I'd like to show to you how to implement conditional logic into user registration forms in Softr using Make. So Softr has launched so-called conditional forms that allow you to build forms that follow sophisticated logic. Now, the thing is, with regard to specific user registration forms, we still have to work with the old set of forms that do not provide the new powerful functionalities, including building multi-stage registration forms that follow some sort of conditions. And the way to solve this conceptually is by connecting these two blocks using Make. And today I'd like to show to you how to implement this. But before we look at the implementation, we can take a look at how that could be displayed to a user with the example of the implementation from my own company. So here right now we're on the registration page, and I'll just fill this out with dummy information. So right now users are seeing the registration form page, but they're just going to perceive it as the first step of a multi-stage process, because once I sign up, they will be forwarded to a new conditional form that has the same design, and to them it's just going to look as the second page of the registration process. And I will also just quickly fill in some dummy data here. We will skip the rest because the kind of different use cases of conditional forms are not the topic of this video. I've just completed the multi-stage process and I forwarded it to the success page. And here inside of Airtable, where my data are stored, it creates one new entry of a user with the respective information in the right columns. So connecting two blocks sounds fairly simple at first glance. So what's the issue here? The issue here is that the user is submitting data, strictly speaking, twice. The user is submitting data when they hit the sign up for free button in the registration form block, and they're submitting data again when they fill out the conditional form. And that is usually producing two lines of data inside our database Airtable, because Airtable perceives it as two distinct submissions. And what we want to achieve is that these two data submissions are connected to the same and the right entry. So let's start with the registration block form. I think it's actually called the sign up form. I use this interchangeably. And here is really simple. You just need to make sure that inside the page rules, after the first sign up, users are not redirected to the success page, but they are redirected through the page that shows the conditional form block. Because you want to generate a multi-step registration process, so after the registration, they need to be forwarded to the conditional form block. And you do this inside the page rules. Now, let's go into implementing a new conditional form block. I go into forms, I take this one, and we will implement this in the simplest way possible. And we'll start connecting it to a data source. So usually you would connect it to your preferred data source, that is Airtable in my case. But as I've mentioned, the issue is doing it that way would produce just a second line of data, and we don't want that. So as an alternative, we can choose Make to send these submitted data from the user to Make. So let's go ahead with creating the respective webhook and scenario in Make. Make, I assume you're familiar with. It's an automation tool that allows to process data and connect different apps. So now we are choosing the webhook and we are building a custom webhook. Let's click add and give it a name. Let's call it conditional. And now we have generated the webhook. A webhook is a URL that contains parameters that can be passed on across apps. So let's copy the URL and paste it here into Softr. And now we can start building the conditional form block. And as I said, we'll implement it in the simplest way because we'll just use it for illustrative purposes today. So let me come up with some data here. So let's say we are just interested in a field for the date of birth of the candidate. And the citizenship of the candidate. And again, this conditional form block is very powerful in the sense that you can build an unlimited number of stages with conditional logic and various design options and so on, but we're keeping it very simple here today because that's not the purpose of the video. So we're asking for date of birth and for citizenship, and we need one more field, which is very important, and that's the hidden field. We call that record ID. And this is basically the trick here. So the user has already filled out the user registration form. So technically, after pressing that first button, they are already registered and logged in. And therefore, in the hidden field, we can capture the record ID and pass that on to Make. So let's do this to initialize the data structure of the webhook. And we can do this by going into the preview mode of Softr and passing on information for the first time. Click Submit here. The information are passed on, and in that process, the webhook URL parameters are also going to be defined. Now we have the data inside of Make, and what we want to do is now to push it into Airtable again and connect it to the right data entry. And recall again, the user has already registered in the first kind of step in the user registration form, and therefore we have an entry inside Airtable already, and we just need to populate the remaining columns. So what we want is to update the record by ID. Let's choose the right base and table, which is this one in my case. And now we're pushing the record ID that was passed on in a hidden way from a user perspective. And we can also pass on the date of birth and the citizenship. Great, so now what's left to do is set everything live and test it. So let's set our make scenario live, and let's also set our new application form live. And now we can go to our website and do the registration again. So the first registration page is the same because we haven't made any changes to it. And I will fill out the data again. And now I'm submitting my data in the user registration form, and I'll be passed on to the conditional form, which from a user perspective just looks like the second page of a registration process. And now I'm filling in my remaining data, and I'm submitting again. And let's check in Airtable what has happened. We have created one entry of a new user with the right email address. The data are pushed into the right column, and we're good to go.